Hey guys, tonight we're diving head first into one of history's most haunting ghost stories. This isn't a tale of spirits and phantoms in the traditional sense. That is something far more chilling, a real, tangible army of 50 Zorro elite soldiers that marched into the desert over 500 years ago and simply vanished. Tonight, we're not just telling a story, we're joining that army on a journey from which no one returned. It's a tale of imperial ambition, a legendary oracle, and a truly epic amount of sand. A word of warning: if you were actually on this trip, your chances of making it back for breakfast would be, let's say, statistically insignificant. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, let me know in the comments what city you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is 525 BCE, and you're standing in Egypt. But it's not the Egypt of golden pharaohs you might picture. The air is thick with dust and suspicion. The old gods feel quiet. That's because the Persian Empire, the superpower of its day, has just rolled in and taken over. Your new ruler is a man named Cambyses II, son of the legendary Cyrus the Great. And Cambyses is having a very, very bad day. To be fair, HES had some good ones recently. The conquest of Egypt was surprisingly swift, culminating in the Battle of Pelusium. This is our first major historical checkpoint. The Egyptians, fierce defenders of their homeland, were undone by a mix of Persian archery and, according to one ancient writer, a bit of psychological warfare. The story goes that Cambyses, knowing the Egyptians revered cats as sacred animals connected to the goddess Bastet, had his frontline soldiers carry cats or perhaps paint them on their shields. The Egyptian archers, terrified of harming the creatures and angering their goddess, hesitated. That hesitation was all the Persians needed. But victory, it seems, hasn't improved Cambyses' mood. You see him stalking through the conquered palaces of Memphis, his shadow long and imposing. HES, the King of Kings, Lord of Lands, but he carries himself with a restless energy, a temper as hot as the midday sun he now rules over. The whispers follow him. They say HES cruel, paranoid, and prone to fits of rage that leave his own courtiers trembling. But here lies a fascinating point of contention that historians still chew on. Was Cambyses I genuinely the monster his chroniclers, mostly his Greek enemies and disgruntled Egyptians, made him out to be? Or was he the victim of a very effective, very ancient smear campaign? Well, I could never know for sure, but the stories paint a grim picture. One such story, a perfect piece of a minus king minus, having minus a minus bad minus day evidence, is the incident with the Apis bull. This isn't just any bull, it's a living god, a sacred animal chosen by priests based on specific divine markings. After a military failure in another campaign, Cambyses returns to Memphis to find the city celebrating because a new Apis bull has been found. He sees joy, and in his paranoid state, he assumes they're celebrating his failure. He summons the priests, demanding to see this new god. They bring the young bull into his presence. You can picture the scene. The priests are beaming, expecting the new king to pay his respects and win favor with Egypt's powerful gods. Instead, Cambyses draws his dagger and, in a fit of mocking rage, stabs the animal in the thigh, sneering, "A worthy god for the Egyptians." The bull later dies from the wound, and the king, according to the legend, begins his descent into madness. A truly weird and specific act of sacrilege. If it happened, it's in this fog of paranoia and fury that the seed of our journey is planted. Cambyses isn't content with holding the fertile Nile Delta. His ambition, or perhaps his insecurity, pushes his gaze westward, into the vast, shimmering emptiness of the Great Sea. Out there, hundreds of miles away, lies a tiny speck of green in a sea of ochre, the Siwa Oasis. And at this oasis is a temple, home to the Oracle of Ammon, An oracle so famous that even Alexander the Great would make a pilgrimage there 2 centuries later. The priests of this oracle have apparently done something to offend the King of Kings. Maybe they predicted his downfall. Maybe they refused to acknowledge his divine right to rule. The exact reason is lost to time. Another one of those details historians love to debate. But whatever the slight, Cambyses takes it personally, very personally. He decides the oracle, this whispering voice of a god in the middle of nowhere, needs to be silenced, permanently. And so, an order is given, not to conquer new lands for resources, not to defend a border, but to dispatch an entire army on a punitive mission against a handful of priests in a remote oasis. It's an idea born of arrogance and rage. You, a soldier, a scribe, a camp follower, it doesn't matter, who hear the command ripple through the city. 50,000 men, an entire corps, pulled from the ranks of the mightiest empire on earth. Their mission to cross the western desert, reach Sewa, and burn the oracle to the ground. Even to you, a person of the ancient world, this sounds insane. The desert is not a road, it's a killer. The king has spoken. The dice have been thrown. A king's wounded pride has just signed a potential death warrant for 50,000 of his own men. And you're about to march with them. The order still hangs in the air. Unbelievable and yet utterly final. To understand how a calm and so reckless could even be given, you have to pull the camera back, way back, and look at the machine you're a part of. This isn't just an army. It's the physical expression of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, the largest and most powerful entity the world has ever known. This empire is a beast of staggering proportions. It stretches from the Indus River in the east to the shores of Greece in the west, from the cold mountains of the Caucasus down to the hot plains of Mesopotamia. It's a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-lingual superpower, and it was built with ruthless efficiency. Its founder, Cyrus the Great Cambyses' father, was a figure of legend, often portrayed as a tolerant and even benevolent ruler. He conquered Babylon and famously freed the captive peoples there, an act immortalized on the Cyrus cylinder, which some have called the first charter of human rights. That was Cyrus. His son, Cambyses, seems to be cut from a different, more fertile cut. This brings us to a central debate that still echoes in university history departments. Was the Persian Empire an enlightened, multicultural project that brought peace and stability, the Pax Pacifica? Or was it a brutal military machine held together by fear, with a very slick public relations department? The truth, as always, is probably somewhere uncomfortably in the middle. But from where you stand, as a soldier in its ranks, what you feel is its power. And Egypt was the jewel in the imperial crown. It wasn't just another piece of land to be colored in on the map. Egypt was ancient, even to the ancients. It had a history stretching back thousands of years, a profound and deeply ingrained culture, and, most importantly, unimaginable wealth. The Nile River was a fountain of life, producing grain surpluses that could feed armies and fill the imperial treasury. To conquer Egypt was to capture a legend. It was a statement to the rest of the world that the Persian king was not just a conqueror, but the legitimate heir to the pharaohs, the rightful ruler of the most prestigious land on earth. Cambyses' victory here was just a military one. It was a profound act of political theater. This vast empire was connected by the royal road, a highway system that was an engineering marvel of its time. And along this road operated the Angarium, the Persian courier system, a network of relay stations with fresh horses and riders ready to go at a moment's notice. The Greek historian Herodotus, our main source for this whole story, wrote of these messengers with grudging admiration. Neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds. It's a powerful image. A king in his palace in Susa could assure command, and it would fly across the continent with incredible speed. This is the system that carries Cambyses' angry decree. This is the system that mobilizes you and 999 others. You look around at your fellow soldiers. The man sharpening his sword next to you might be a Median, his family once rivals of the Persians. The archers practicing their aim are perhaps from the Babylon War. Their own great empire now just a province. There are Greeks from Ionia, Bactrians from the foothills of the Hindu Kush, Lydians famed for their wealth. You are a walking, breathing testament to the empire's reach, a mosaic of conquered peoples, all now serving the King of Kings. This incredible logistical power breeds a special kind of confidence, or maybe arrogance is the better word. The Persian High Command has conquered mighty rivers, crossed impassable mountains, and subdued ancient cities. From their perspective, what is a desert? It's just another obstacle, a big, empty piece of the map to be crossed. They believe that with enough men, enough supplies, and enough imperial will, anything can be brought to heel, even nature itself. And so, they're supremely confident, multicultural. Imperial first turns its attention to its bizarre target, not a fortress, not a rival army, but a tiny pinprick of green in the middle of a deadly wasteland. Why? Why risk so much for so little? The answer lies with the mysterious power of the place itself, the oracle of Zeus minus Ammon at the Siwa oasis, a place where the whispers of a god were said to be heard in the rustling of the leaves. The name of your destination begins to circulate through the ranks like a nervous whisper. Siwa. For most of you, soldiers from Persia, Mesopotamia, or the rocky coast of Ionia, the name means nothing. It's just a sound. But for the local Egyptians, the guides, the laborers, the auxiliary troops conscripted into this massive force, the name carries a heavy weight. You see it in their eyes when the name is spoken. A flicker of fear, a glimmer of awe. They know what Siwa is, and they know the desert that guards it. Siwa is an island. Not an island in the sea, but an island of life adrift in an ocean of death, the great sea of the Western Desert. Imagine a place so remote that it takes weeks of hard travel across a featureless, sun-scorched landscape to reach it. Then, suddenly, a splash of impossible green appears on the horizon. Thousands of date palms, ancient olive groves, and the glint of fresh water from natural springs. Siwa is a miracle of geography. A self-contained world thriving in defiance of the desolation surrounding it. But it's not the dates or the water that makes Siwa famous. It's the voice that is said to live there. The oasis is home to one of the most revered oracles of the ancient world, the oracle of the god Ammon. This isn't just the Egyptian ram-headed god of Thebes. Here in the deep desert, where cultures blur, he has become syncretized, merged with the greatest of the Greek gods, Zeus, to the wider world. This is the oracle of Zeus minus Ammon. Its fame is international. Pilgrims from Libya, Egypt, Greece, and beyond have made the perilous journey to ask for its divine guidance. 2 centuries from your present moment, the most famous conqueror of all, Alexander the Great, will make this same journey to have his own divinity confirmed by the oracle. It is, in short, a very, very big deal. And how does this oracle work? It's not what you might think. This isn't a priestess inhaling volcanic fumes and muttering prophecies like at Delphi. The process at Siwa is far more unique, and frankly, a bit more theatrical. This is our weird bit of knowledge for the day. The priests of Ammon, it's said, don't just interpret words, they interpret movement. They possess a sacred boat, a gilded ceremonial bow, that carries a statue of the god. On holy days, 80 priests hoist this boat onto their shoulders and parade it through the oasis. The god speaks through the motion of the boat. A person seeking guidance shouts their question. If the boat lurches forward in the priest's arms, the answer is yes. If it recoils or shakes violently, the answer is no. The priests don't speak for the god. They are merely the vessels for the god's physical response. You can just picture it, a massive, golden boat seemingly bucking and nodding on the shoulders of 80 men as it answers the deepest questions of kings and commoners alike. So, this is your target, not a fortress, but a temple. Your enemy is not a rival general, but a group of priests in their divine, head-nodding statue. And this brings you to the question everyone in the camp is too scared to ask aloud. What on earth did these priests do to provoke the wrath of the King of Kings? Here, the historical record goes completely silent. leaving a vacuum that historians have been trying to fill for millennia. This is the great academic debate at the heart of the expedition. Why send an entire army on what is essentially an errand of destruction? The rumors you hear around the flickering campfires are the very same theories scholars propose today. One theory is political. Cambyses saw himself as the new pharaoh of Egypt. A pharaoh's rule was intrinsically linked to the gods. Perhaps Cambyses sent messengers to Siwa demanding the oracle publicly recognize his legitimacy, to declare him the true son of Ammon. And perhaps the priests, loyal to the old ways or just fiercely independent, refuse. To a man as insecure and volatile as Cambyses, such a public snub would be an intolerable insult, a direct challenge to his authority that needed to be erased. Another, more dramatic theory is that the oracle gave a damning prophecy against Cambyses. Maybe his messengers asked about his upcoming campaign into Nubia, and the oracle predicted the humiliating disaster it would become. Or worse, maybe it predicted the king's own imminent, ignominious death. Imagine the fury of a man who believes himself all-minus powerful being told by a wooden statue on a boat that his time is short. The only way to prove the prophecy wrong, in his mind, would be to destroy the source. And then there's the simplest, and perhaps most chilling, explanation. Maybe the priests did nothing at all. Maybe Cambyses, in his paranoia, couldn't tolerate any center of power or influence within his new territory that he didn't directly control. The Oracle of Siwa was an ancient, respected, and independent authority. People listened to it. For a tyrant, that's a bug, not a feature. In this version of events, the mission isn't a response to an insult. It's a cold, calculated move to eliminate a potential source of dissent. A bit of state-sponsored terror to remind the newly conquered Egyptians exactly who is in charge now. Whatever the real reason, it's sealed your fate. You are now part of a 50, thorough-man hammer being sent to Smashna. The logic is baffling. The goal seems petty, but the order is absolute. The preparations for the march begin in earnest. The might of the Persian Empire is about to be aimed at a whisper in the desert. The rumor of a punitive expedition solidifies into a sound. First a murmur, then a rumble, then the deafening chaos of an army being born. The abstract number 50,000 takes on a terrifying, physical form. You are standing on the edge of a vast, temporary city of tents and men that has sprung up outside the ancient capital of Memphis. This is where the force gathers, a human tide being pulled together before it crashes into the desert. You look around and see the empire in miniature. Here are the Persians and the Medes, the heart of the army. They are the officers, the cavalry, the ones who carry themselves with the ingrained confidence of conquerors. They wear brightly colored trousers and soft felt caps, their tunics covered in intricate scale armor that glints in the fierce Egyptian sun. Nearby, a contingent of Ionian Greeks, mercenaries hired for their discipline and heavy infantry skills, stand in stark contrast. They are clad in bronze cuirasses, greaves, and helmets in curry law, round shields. They fight for pay, their loyalty professional, their expressions unreadable. Further on, you see a group of Scythian archers, nomadic warriors from the steppes, identifiable by their tall, pointed hats and their powerful composite bows. They are quiet, watchful men, more at home on a horse than on their own 2 feet. There are Babylonians, Lydians, Seleucians, even some conscripted Egyptians roped into guiding the force that now occupies their homeland. It's a babel of languages, a jumble of cultures, all held together by the rigid command structure of the empire and a shared administrative language, Aramaic, that allows a Median officer to give an order to a Greek platoon leader. This is the core strength of the Persian military, its ability to draw upon the diverse skills of its vast subject peoples. And that brings us to the number itself, a number that has echoed through history for 2.5 millennia of 50,000. Was it really that many? This is one of the most persistent questions historians have about the story. Ancient chroniclers, Herodotus included, had a flair for the dramatic. Big, round numbers sounded better. 50,000 men marching into the desert is a much more epic tale than, say, 7,000. Logistically, supplying 50 Zaro men in to support animals, camels, donkeys, horses with food and water across one of the most arid landscapes on Earth is a task so monumental it borders on the impossible. Many modern historians argue that the true number was likely much smaller, perhaps a more realistic expeditionary force of 10, Daro or 15, Bahir, and that the Wushu, Zoro was either a boast by Cambyses or a dramatic exaggeration by Herodotus to make the army's eventual fate even more spectacular. But then there's the counter-minus argument. Cambyses was not known for his subtlety. This was a punitive mission born of rage. He may have intentionally sent an overwhelmingly large force precisely because it was overkill. A small force could be ambushed, defeat, but 50,000 men? That wasn't an army. It was a human battering ram, designed to be unstoppable. The sheer size of the force was part of the psychological message to the priests at Siwa, to any other Egyptians thinking of rebellion. Whether it was a genuine military calculation or a historian's dramatic flourish, the debate is still very much alive. For you, standing in the middle of it all, the number feels terrifyingly real. And how is this mass of humanity kept functional? Through rigorous organization. This is our little niche detail, the Persian military ration system. Every soldier, from the highest minus ranking immortal, the king's elite guard of 10, Zaro down to the humblest foot soldier, was entitled to a precise, standardized daily ration. It usually consisted of a measure of flour or barley, a portion of wine or beer, and occasionally dried fruits or salted meat. You can picture the quartermasters, scrolls in hand, meticulously doling out sacks of grain and clay jars of wine. It's this meticulous, almost bureaucratic, approach to logistics that allows the empire to move its armies across continents. For you, that means a gritty, twice minus baked barley bread that will become your constant companion. The bland taste of empire in your mouth. Day by day, the force swells, the sound of thousands of men, the braying of donkeys, the lowing of oxen pulling supply carts, the sharp clang of hammer on anvil from the blacksmith's stints. It all blends into a constant, overwhelming roar. The air smells of dust, sweat, animals, and the smoke of 10,000 cooking fires. The preparations are almost complete. The commanders have their orders. The guides, their faces etched with a deep knowledge of the sands, have been consulted, their warnings perhaps politely ignored. The entire force is about to be set in motion, a river of men and beasts, flowing south along the Nile. For now, you are a part of the greatest army on earth, about to march on the command of a furious king. The destination is Siwa, but the first stop is a city called Thebes, the last bastion of civilization you will see for a very long time. The command to march finally comes. The vast, sprawling camp groans to life like a single, colossal organism waking from a fitful sleep. Tents are struck, supplies are loaded onto groaning carts and the complaining backs of thousands of pack animals, and the 50,000 men begin to shuffle into a column that stretches for miles. You find your place in this river of humanity, and the journey south begins. You are not marching into the desert yet, not directly. The first leg of the journey is a long trek up the Nile, from the administrative capital of Memphis towards the ancient southern capital Thebes. This part of the march is, if not easy, at least manageable. You march along the banks of the life-giving river, a ribbon of vibrant green cutting through the pale, sandy landscape. To your left, the Nile flows northward, its waters dark and rich with the silt that has fed Egypt for millennia. Small boats with single, triangular sails glide past. To your right, endless fields of barley, wheat, and flax stretch to the horizon, dotted with villages of mud-brick houses and the towering silhouettes of date palms. The air is filled with the sights and sounds of civilization. You see farmers working their fields with wooden plows pulled by oxen, their movements slow and rhythmic, unchanged for centuries. You hear the rhythmic creak of the shadua, a simple but ingenious irrigation device, a long pole with a weight on one end and a bucket on the other used to lift water from the river to the field. It's a sound that is the very heartbeat of this land. For you, a soldier from a drier, rockier part of the empire, The sheer abundance of life is astonishing. It's a world away from the arid plains of Persia. And then, after many days of march, you see it, Thebes, even from a distance. It takes your breath away. Thebes is not just a city, it's a monument, known to the Egyptians as Wazet. It was the religious and, for a long time, the political capital of the New Kingdom pharaohs. This is the city of Ramses the Great and Tutankhamun. As you get closer, its scale becomes almost overwhelming. On the east bank of the Nile, where you are now, stands the city of the living. Two colossal temple complexes dominate the landscape. Karnak and Luxor. Karnak is less a temple and more a city of gods, a sprawling, chaotic complex of sanctuaries, pylons, and obelisks built and added to by pharaohs over 2,000 years. You march past its outer walls, catching glimpses of the great hypostyle hall, a forest of 130 massive stone columns, so vast that 100 men could stand on the capital of each one. The sheer scale is meant to intimidate, to make a mortal feel like an ant in the presence of the divine. And it works. Here in Thebes, you get your last taste of what feels like true civilization. The city is a bustling hub, filled with priests, artisans, merchants, and soldiers. The markets are overflowing with good spices from the east, ebony and ivory from Nubia to the south, fine linens woven in the local workshops. The air is thick with the smell of incense from the temples and roasting meat from the food stalls. For a few days, you and your comrades are allowed some rest. You drink beer in noisy taverns. You marvel at the towering statues of forgotten kings. You wash the dust of the march from your clothes in the sacred waters of the Nile. This is a good place to mention a little known fact about ancient Egyptian life that you might observe here: the importance of wigs in the blistering Egyptian heat. Most people, both men and women of the upper classes, kept their heads shaved for cleanliness and to avoid lice, but a bald head was not considered fashionable. So, they wore elaborate wigs made from human hair, or sometimes cheaper versions from vegetable fibers, especially on formal occasions. A well-made wig was a status symbol. You see them everywhere in Thebes, on priests, on nobles, their intricate brazen curls sitting oddly atop otherwise bare heads. But beneath the surface of this vibrant city, there's a tension you can feel. That the banned priesthood of Amun-Ra was once the most powerful institution in the land, at times even rivaling the pharaoh himself. They are now a conquered people. They watch your vast Persian army with veiled expressions. Are they resentful? Frightened? The academic consensus is that Cambyses' rule was deeply unpopular here, and his perceived impiety, like the rumored stabbing of the Apis bull, would have been met with horror, especially in this deeply religious city. Historians still debate the extent of Egyptian resistance, whether it was active rebellion or a more passive, cultural resistance, but it was undoubtedly there. For you, these last days in Thebes are bittersweet. It's a moment of unrespite, but it's shadowed by the knowledge of what comes next. You look west, across the Nile. There lies the West Bank, the land of the dead, with its famous Valley of the Kings and its silent, imposing funerary temples. And beyond that, the horizon dissolves into a shimmering, hazed light. That is where you are going, beyond the reach of the Nile, beyond the last city, beyond the final outpost of green. The order comes to cross the river. The army begins to move. You take one last look at the temples and the bustling streets of Thebes. You dip your hands in the Nile one last time. From this point on, there will be no more cities, no more rivers, no more life, only the desert and the silence. The crossing of the Nile is a massive undertaking. Thousands of soldiers, animals, and supply wagons are ferried across the wide, slow-moving river on a flotilla of barges and boats. As you step off the ferry onto the West Bank, the atmosphere changes instantly. The air feels different, drier. The vibrant green of the East Bank gives way to a palette of ochre, beige, and brown. You have crossed a symbolic threshold, from the land of the living to the land of the dead, the traditional domain of the setting sun in the afterlife. And now, the true challenge of the expedition becomes terrifyingly clear. It's not about enemy soldiers or fortified cities. It's about logistics. Specifically, the logistics of thirst. How do you keep 50 men and thousands of animals alive in one of the driest places on Earth? This is a central, brutal equation that will govern your every waking moment from now on. You see the logistics in action all around you. The real heart of the army isn't the infantry or the cavalry. It's the colossal baggage train that lumbers behind you. An army of this size is a thirsty beast. A soldier marching in the desert heat needs, at a bare minimum, a gallon of water per day just to survive. That's 50 gallons of water per day, every day, just for the men. Then you have the horses for the cavalry and officers, and the thousands of donkeys and camels used as pack animals. A camel can go for days without water, which is why they are the stars of the show. But even they have their limits. The horses and donkeys need water daily. The total daily water requirement for an army this size is a staggering number, likely well over 100 gallons. And you can't carry it all with you. Water is heavy. 1 gallon weighs over 8 pounds. To carry enough water for the entire journey from Thebes to Siwa, a trip that could take weeks, is a physical impossibility. The entire plan, therefore, hinges on one critical strategy: oasis hopping. The route has been planned as a series of marches between known water sources. The first major stop is the cargo oasis, about a week's march away. The plan is to carry just enough water to get there, replenish the supplies, and then push on to the next oasis, and the next, until you reach Siwa. It's a sound plan, on paper, but it leaves absolutely no room for error. I missed oasis, a dry well, a delay on the march, any of these could spell disaster. This brings us to a major point of historical debate among military historians and archaeologists. Just how sophisticated was Persian military logistics? Some scholars argue that the Persians were masters of supply, capable of supporting massive armies in hostile environments through meticulous planning, pre-minus position supply dumps, and the efficient use of their engineering corps to dig wells. They point to other successful Persian campaigns as evidence. Others argue that, while impressive, the system had its limits, and a trans-minus desert expedition of this scale was pushing those limits to the breaking point. They suggest that Cambyses' plan was fatally flawed from the outset, a product of imperial hubris that underestimated the sheer hostility of the environment. The fate of your expedition hangs in the balance of this very question. You are now intimately familiar with the tools of desert survival. The water is carried in fired clay amphorae and, more commonly, in water skins made from goat or sheep hide. These skins are a lifesaver, but they are not perfect. They can leak the water inside, sloshing around for days under the hot sun. Takes on a foul, leathery taste, but it is life, so you drink it without complaint. Every soldier is responsible for his own personal supply, but the bulk of the water is carried by the camels, each one loaded with a swaying, gurgling cargo. Here's a small, weird detail of desert travel. You quickly learn the surprising importance of salt. When you sweat as much as you do in the desert, you lose not just water but also vital body salts. Drinking water alone isn't enough. You can actually dilute your blood and become sick. So, part of your ration includes salt, either as crystals to be licked or mixed into your food. The quartermasters also issued dates, which are a perfect desert food high in sugar for energy, easy to carry, and they last forever. Your diet becomes brutally simple hard bread, dried dates, and salty, leathery minus tasting water. As the army organizes itself on the west bank for the final push, you watch the Egyptian guides. They are the true experts here, their faces weathered like old leather, their eyes accustomed to scanning the blank horizon for the faintest landmark. They confer with the Persian officers, pointing at maps drawn on papiers or simply scratching lines in the sand. They know the way. They know where the water is. The success of the entire mission rests on their knowledge and their loyalty. You watch them, and you wonder if they are as confident as they appear. Or do they know, in their bones, that what the army is about to attempt is not just difficult, but a profound violation of the natural order of things? The final preparations are made. The water skins are filled to bursting. The last rations are distributed. A horn sounds. A deep, mournful note that seems to be swallowed by the vast, empty space around you. The column begins to move, not south along the river anymore, but west, directly west. You take your first steps off the cultivated land and onto the sand proper. The soft, fertile soil gives way to grit and draw. You turn your head for one last look at the thin green line of the Nile Valley. It's already receding, a memory of a different world. Ahead of you lies nothing but a shimmering, empty horizon. The real march has begun. The moment you leave the Nile Valley behind, the world changes. It's not a gradual transition. It's a door slamming shut. The green is gone. The scent of damp earth and vegetation is replaced by a sterile, dusty smell. The scent of ancient rock and sun minus baked sand. The soft, humming background noise of civilization, the chatter of people. The sounds of animals. The creak of water minus lifts vanishes. It's replaced by a profound and unnerving silence, broken only by the rhythmic crunch of thousands of marching feet on gravel and the mournful groan of the supply carts. This is your first real taste of the Western Desert, known today as part of the Libyan Desert. It's not the romantic, rolling sand dunes you might have imagined. The landscape here is a flat, hard, gravel plain, the Siri hour, interspersed with rocky outcrops and mesas that shimmer in the distance like ghostly islands. The ground is a mosaic of grey, brown, and yellow, littered with sharp stones that test the endurance of your leather sandals and the hooves of the animals. And then there's the sun. It's no longer just a source of light and warmth. Out here, it's a physical presence, an enemy. It beats down from a flawless, pale blue sky with a relentless, punishing intensity. There is no shade, not a single tree, not a single cloud. You pull your cloak over your head, creating a small pocket of shadow, but the heat is suffocating. You can feel the moisture being wicked away from your body, your skin growing tight and dry. Sweat stings your eyes and leaves white salt stains on your tunic. The daily routine quickly becomes a grueling, monotonous rhythm dictated by the sun. You wake before dawn, in the cool, grey pre-minus light. The air is deceptively cold, a reminder that the desert is a land of extremes. You eat a meager breakfast of hard bread and a few dates, check your water skin, and then you begin to march as the sun's first rays slice across the horizon. You march through the morning, while the heat is still unbearable. The column is a monstrous, slow minus moving serpent of men and animals, kicking up a choking cloud of fine dust that coats everything, getting into your eyes, your nose, your throat. By midday, the heat becomes unbearable. The order is given to halt. There are no tents to pitch. That would be a waste of energy. You simply find what little shade you can, huddling in the lee of a rocky outcrop, or even curling up in the shadow of a camel. The air shimmers with heat waves, distorting the horizon. Distant rocks seem to float above the ground. Mirages of impossible lakes appear and vanish, playing tricks on your thirsty mind. You doze, you wait, you try not to think about the water in your skin, rationing every precious sip. This is a good moment to touch on a fascinating, if grim, piece of desert archaeology. All across this landscape, invisible to the untrained eye, are the faint traces of ancient caravan routes, some of which you might be following now. Archaeologists have found that these routes are sometimes marked by grave minus markers of a sort not of humans, but of broken pottery. For thousands of years, people have been crossing this desert, and when a water jar broke, it was a minor disaster. The shards were simply left where they fell. Over centuries, these accumulated fragments of pottery create a faint trail, a ghostly line connecting one oasis to the next. Historians and archaeologists still debate whether the Persians were following a well-minus established trade route or blazing a new, more direct military path. If it's the latter, the risk is exponentially higher. As the afternoon sun begins to lose its ferocity, the horn sounds again. You get back on your feet, your body stiff and aching, and you march for another few hours until dusk. As twilight descends, the desert reveals a different kind of beauty. The sky explodes into a canvas of orange, pink, and deep purple. The heat dissipates quickly, and the cold returns. Camp is made. Small fires are lit. using the precious dried animal dung that was brought along for fuel. The smell of cooking is thin in the vast emptiness. You eat your evening meal, a small portion of gruel or more of the same hard bread. The nights are as extreme as the days. The temperature plummets. You huddle together with your comrades for warmth, wrapped in your cloak, staring up at a sky unlike any you've ever seen, with no city lights to wash it out. The stars are impossibly bright and numerous. They seem close enough to touch. The Milky Way is a thick, glowing band of light across the celestial dome. It's beautiful, but it's a cold, indifferent beauty. It offers no comfort. You lie on the hard ground, trying to sleep, but the silence is so deep it's like a pressure on your ears. You become acutely aware of your own smallness, the fragility of the life you're reclinging to. You are a tiny spark of warmth in a vast, cold, and ancient emptiness. The reality of your situation sinks in, deeper than the cold of the sand. You are utterly, completely at the mercy of this place. The Persian Empire, with all its might and glory, feels very far away. Out here, the only emperor is the desert itself. Day 2 of the march is the same as day 1. Day 3 is the same as day 2. A relentless, soul-minus crushing routine of heat, dust, thirst, and fatigue. The sun rises, you march. The sun is at its zenith. You hide. The sun sets. You march. You rest. The landscape refuses to change. The flat, gravelly plain stretches on, endless and unforgiving. The sense of making progress is almost non-minus existent. You could be marching in circles for all you know. Your only markers are distant, hazy mesas that seem to never get any closer, and the position of the sun in the merciless sky. The mood in the army begins to shift. The initial confidence, the swagger of the empire's finest, begins to fray at the edges. The soldiers are quieter now. The easy banter of the first day has been baked out of them. Men march in silence, lost in their own private worlds of misery. Your world has shrunk to the most basic elements, the burning in your leg muscles, the chafing of your sandal straps, the gauze fabric of your tunic sticking to your sweaty back, and the constant, gnawing anxiety of thirst. You are acutely aware of the water in your water skin. It's no longer just a drink. It's your lifeline. You measure it in small, unsatisfying sips. You learn to swish it around in your mouth before swallowing, trying to trick your body into feeling more hydrated than it is. The water level in the skin goes down with terrifying speed. You start to look at your comrades' skins, gauging how much they have left. A subtle paranoia begins to creep into the camp. Water discipline is ruthlessly enforced. An officer catches a soldier taking more than his allotted share from one of the large supply skins on a camel. The punishment is swift and brutal, a lesson for all to see. In this environment, water theft is worse than desertion. This is where you see the true genius of the camel, the unsung hero of this expedition. This is our quirky little knowledge drop for the day. We all know camels can store water, but the common belief that it's all in their humps is a myth. The humps are actually fat reserves, a source of energy when food is scarce. Their real superpowers are in their physiology. A camel can lose up to 30% of its body mass in water and still survive, a level of dehydration that would be instantly fatal to a human. Their red blood cells are oval-shaped, not circular, which allows them to flow more easily when the blood thickens with dehydration and prevents them from rupturing when the camel rehydrates by drinking huge quantities of water very quickly. They can drink over 30 gallons in under 15 minutes. You look at these languid, oddly graceful creatures with a newfound respect. They are biological miracles, perfectly adapted to this place where you are so profoundly out of your element. The days blur into one long, continuous ordeal. Day 4, Day 5. The first men begin to fall. Sunstruck claims a few. They collapse in the marching line, their bodies unable to cope with the heat. They are lifted onto the already overloaded carts, their fate uncertain. The animals suffer too. A few of the donkeys, less hardy than the camels, succumb to exhaustion and are left where they fall. A grim marker for anyone who might follow. By day 6, the water situation is critical. The supply you carried from Thebes is almost gone. The entire army is now running on fumes, driven forward by the desperate promise of the cargo oasis. The guides are consulted constantly. The officers, who once treated them with casual disdain, now hang on their every word. Are we close? How much further? The guides point to the unchanging horizon, their faces grim, and say, soon. The academic world still argues about the exact route the army took. Was it the main, well-Strodden, or BL-Arbin, the 40 days road, a major ancient caravan trail, or did they take a more direct, but less-known and more dangerous shortcut to save time? If they took a shortcut, they would be trading the relative safety of a known route for speed, a gamble that could save them days or cost them everything. This choice, likely made by the Persian High Command against the better judgment of the local guides, is a crucial, unanswerable question. The success or failure of reaching Karga could depend entirely on it. On the evening of the 7th day, morale is at its lowest point. The water is all but gone. The men are gaunt, their eyes hollow, their lips cracked and bleeding. The hope that sustained them for a week is starting to curdle into despair. Whispers of turning back are silenced by the grim reality that they are now closer to Karga than to Thebes. There is no retreat. The only way is forward. You lie down to rest, your throat a desert of its own, and you pray for the morning. You pray that the guides are right. You pray for a smudge of green on the horizon. And then, just as the sun rises on the 8th day, a cry goes up from the front of the column. It's a weak, cracked sound at first. Then it's picked up and repeated, growing into a wave of desperate relief that washes back through the ranks. Men who were too tired to stand are now scrambling to their feet, pointing. You follow their gaze, and you see it. It's faint, the dark green smudge on the horizon, shivering in the morning heat. It's not a mirage. It's real. It's the cargo oasis. It's salvation. The sight of that dark green line on the horizon sends a jolt of pure adrenaline through the exhausted army. The pace of the march quickens, desperation giving way to a frantic, stumbling rush. The last few miles are an agony of anticipation. The smudge of green grows agonizingly slowly, resolving itself into the distinct shapes of palm trees. You can almost smell the water, a phantom scent of damp earth and life that plays on your parched senses. And then you are there. You burst through the outer fringe of scrub and rock and into the oasis proper. The transition is breathtaking. One moment you are in the dead, sterile world of the desert. The next, you are surrounded by life. The Karga oasis isn't just a small pool of water. It's a vast depression in the desert floor, over 100 miles long. A massive basin filled with acacia and palm trees. The air is cooler here, thick with humidity and the buzz of insects. The ground beneath your feet is no longer rock and gravel, but soft, sandy soil. The first thing everyone does is make for the wells and springs. All military discipline breaks down in a chaotic scramble for water. Men push and shove, dunking their heads into the life-giving pools, drinking so deeply their stomachs ache. The animals are just as desperate, camels and horses jostling for position at the trough. Officers shout themselves hoarse trying to restore order, but for a few precious minutes, there is only the primal, overwhelming need for water. You kneel by a spring, the water cool and impossibly sweet after a week of the foul minus tasting liquid from your water skin. And you drink until you can drink no more. It feels like you are pouring life back into your body. For the next few days, the cargo oasis is your paradise. The army makes camp under the shade of the palm groves. The water skins are refilled. The animals are watered and allowed to graze. And the men are given a chance to recover. For the first time in a week, you feel human again. You wash the cake dust from your skin and clothes. You can lie in the shade during the midday heat without feeling like you are being cooked alive. Food rations are distributed, supplemented by the oasis's greatest treasure dates. The sweet, energy-rich fruit seems like a feast after a week of hard bread. Karga has been a vital stop on the desert trade routes for thousands of years. It's not an empty paradise. It's inhabited. You see the locals, desert-dwellers of Libyan and Egyptian descent, watching the sudden arrival of 50 Sarawal men with a mixture of fear and opportunism. They trade fresh fruit and perhaps a bit of goat meat for whatever small trinkets the soldiers have. This is a key historical point. The army was not moving through an entirely empty void. These oases were populated, connected nodes in a desert network. The people living here would have been the repository of news and history for the entire region. And it's here, in this temporary haven, that you've reached the point of no return. Thebes is a week's march behind you. The next known major oasis on the way to Siwa, the Dakar Oasis, is another several days' march to the west, but Siwa itself is still hundreds of miles away, across the most dangerous empty stretch of the Great Sea. The journey from Karga to Siwa is the true test, the part of the route with no reliable water sources in between. This is the leg of the journey that requires a leap of faith. The Persian commanders huddle with the guides, planning the next stage. The atmosphere in the command tents is tense. They have made it this far, but the first leg of the journey was harder than they anticipated. The desert has already shown its teeth. The number of men and animals lost to heat and dehydration, while not catastrophic, was a sobering warning. Now they have to make a critical decision. Do they press on directly to Siwa, a long and perilous journey across a largely unknown wasteland, or do they take a longer, safer route, hopping from Karga to Dekla and then Far Afra, sticking to the known chain of oases before making the final push? Herein lies another of those great historical unknowns that academics love to puzzle over. Herodotus, our primary source, simply says the army marched from Thebes for 7 days to an oasis and then struck out for Siwa. Most scholars assume this first oasis was Karga. He makes no mention of them stopping at Dakla or any other oasis. This suggests they took a direct, high-risk route. Why would they do this? Perhaps it was arrogance. Perhaps it was a desire for speed, to catch the priests at Siwa by surprise. Or perhaps it was ignorance. The Persian commanders, sitting in their tents, looking at maps that were little more than sketches, may have fatally underestimated the distance and the danger. You, as a soldier on the ground, are not privy to these high-level discussions. All you know is that this green paradise is temporary. You enjoy the shade, the water, and the rest, but you know that soon the order will come to march again. You look west, where the palm groves of Karga end and the desert begins again. This time, the horizon looks even more intimidating. Before, you were marching towards this place of salvation. Now, you are about to march away from it, into an even greater emptiness. Karga is a beautiful, life-giving island, but you've come to realize it's also a trap. It's the last friendly shore before you sail into a sea of sand from which there may be no return. The rest you get here is double-edged. It rebuilds your strength, but it also gives you time to dread what lies ahead. This oasis isn't just a stopping point. It's the final launching pad into the abyss. The days of rest in the relative paradise of Karga Oasis come to an end all too quickly. The order to prepare for the next leg of the march ripples through the camp. The atmosphere is noticeably different this time. The mood is somber, laced with a quiet dread that wasn't there when you left Thebes. You've had a taste of what the desert can do. You've seen men fall. You now understand the stakes. As the quartermasters oversee the refiling of every water skin and amphora, you watch the local guide. They are the men who will lead you into the true wasteland, the vast expanse of the Great Sea that separates you from Siwa. They are a small group, their faces dark and creased like dried fruit, their eyes holding the wisdom of generations who have survived this unforgiving environment. And if you look closely, you can see the deep unease that they try to hide from their Persian employers. You see them in quiet, intense conversations with the junior officers, the ones who actually have to lead the men on the ground. They are not speaking in the confident tones of men who are certain of the path. Their gestures are more urgent, their voices lower. They point to the sky, to the west, and then make sweeping motions with their hands. You don't need to understand their language to grasp the meaning of their warnings. They are talking about the desert's moods, its hidden dangers, things that don't appear on any paper's map. They are likely talking about the terrain ahead. This is a key geological point. The stretch between Karga and Siwa is not the hard-packed gravel plain you've crossed so far. It is the beginning of the true sea, a region of massive, shifting dunes that can be hundreds of feet high. These are not the gentle, rolling hills of a beach. They are mountains of sand, a constantly changing landscape where landmarks vanish overnight. Marching through deeps and is exhausting, so minus destroying work. The daily mileage of the army will drop significantly. Carts will get stuck and have to be abandoned. The journey will take longer than planned, and a longer journey means more water is needed. This is where you might overhear a fascinating and weird bit of local desert knowledge. A whispered conversation about navigating this featureless world. How do the guides know the way? Of course, they use the sun and the stars. But they also use clues you would never notice. They read the ripples on the surface of the sand, which indicate the direction of the prevailing wind. They know the subtle differences in the color of the sand, which can indicate different mineral compositions and thus different regions. And, most strangely, some old guides claim they can navigate by smell, asserting that the sand in different areas has a unique scent. To you, it all smells like dust, but to them, it's a map. The central point of their argument with the Persian commanders, however, would have been the route. This is a critical point of academic debate. The safest way to Siwa would have been to travel west to the Dakla Oasis, then north to Far Afra, and then northwest to Siwa, essentially tracing the outer edge of the Sand Sea. It's longer, but it keeps the army in contact with known water sources. The Persian plan, as far as you can tell, is to cut directly across the open desert. A straight line. It's the kind of brutally simple, arrogant logic a military commander would love. It's faster, it's more direct, it's also exponentially more dangerous. The guides would have argued passionately against this. They would have spoken of the Bear Belamar, the river without water, a vast, waterless valley that must be crossed. They would know that there are no wells out there, no springs, nothing. The Persian officers, products of an empire that bends nature to its will, likely listen with a mixture of impatience and contempt. What do these provincial nomads know of military necessity? They have their orders from the King of Kings. They have a schedule to keep. Delays are not an option. You can almost hear the conversation we have 50. Zaro, men in the finest logistical train in the world. We will not be scared by old wives' tales about a river without water. The decision is made. The direct route is chosen. The warnings of the guides are overruled. You see the resignation on their faces. They have been paid, and they will do their job. But the spark of confidence is gone. They are now leading a death march, and they know it. The unease is contagious. It spreads through the ranks. The soldiers see the grim faces of the men who are supposed to be their salvation. On the final morning in Karga, as you prepare to march, you feel a change in the air. It's subtle at first, a faint restlessness. The wind begins to pick up, not the usual gentle morning breeze, but a warmer, more insistent wind blowing from the south. You see the guides looking towards the southern horizon, their expressions hardening. They exchange worried glances. One of them might mutter a word you started to hear in nervous whispers around the campfire's concern. The hot southern wind, the harbinger of the desert's greatest weapon. The horn sounds. The order is given. The army shuffles out of the life minus giving embrace of the oasis and back into the furnace. You take one last look back at the palm trees, a paradise shrinking behind you. Ahead, the horizon is a flat, empty line, but the sky above it seems to have a strange, yellowish tint. The whispers of the guides echo in your mind, a premonition of a danger far greater than just heat and thirst. You are a few days out from Karga, deep into the open desert now. The world has become an endless ocean of sand. The hard packed gravel plains are a distant memory. Now, you march through soft, yielding sand that swallows your energy with every step. The great dunes, majestic and terrible, roll across the landscape like silent, golden waves. Progress is agonizingly slow. The supply carts, their wheels sinking deep into the sand, have been largely abandoned. The supplies have been transferred to the camels, the true ships of this desert sea. The sun is still your torment, but now it has an accomplice, the wind. The southern wind that you first felt on the morning you left Karga has grown from a whisper to a persistent, moaning presence. It's the Khamsin, a word the Egyptian guides speak with a grim reverence. You learn that it means 50 in Arabic. For the 50 days it is said to blow in the spring. It's a hot, dry, unsuffocating wind, carrying with it a fine, gritty dust that gets into everything. It stings your eyes, clogs your nose, and coats the back of your throat with a layer of grime. The wind has a psychological effect as well. It's a constant, maddening noise, a low howl that never stops. Day or night, it whips at your cloak, fills the air with a hazy curtain of dust, and erases your tracks almost as soon as you make them. The world feels unstable, impermanent. The very landscape is in motion around you. The crests of the high dunes smoke with plumes of sand, like volcanoes getting ready to erupt. The guides are visibly on edge. They march with their faces wrapped in cloth, their eyes constantly scanning the southern horizon, which has taken on a permanent, sickly, yellowish minus brown hue. They urge the commanders to push the men harder, to march longer hours. There is a new urgency, a frantic race against something you cannot yet see. The officers, perhaps beginning to realize their mistake in ignoring the guide's earlier warnings, relent. The pace becomes even more grueling. The brief respite of cargo is now a fading dream. This is a good time to talk about a weird, specific phenomenon of desert winds known as singing sands or booming dunes. It's a natural phenomenon that you might experience here. Under certain conditions, the right wind speed, the right grain size, the right humidity, the movement of sand down the face of a large dune can create a deep, resonant sound, almost like a cello or a low-minus flying airplane. It can be incredibly loud, up to 100 decibels, and can last for several minutes. Imagine being in this already alien landscape and suddenly hearing the dunes themselves begin to hum and moan around you. The guides would know what it is, but for you, a soldier from Persia or Greece, it would sound like the world itself is groaning in protest at your presence. It would be a terrifying, supernatural experience, a sign of the gods' displeasure. The sky continues to darken, not with clouds, but with dust. The sun, once a sharp, brilliant disk, is now a pale, hazy wafer seen through a thick, yellow veil. The heat, carried on the wind, becomes even more oppressive, a furnace-like blast that offers no relief. The air grows thick and heavy. It becomes difficult to breathe. The fine dust infiltrates every part of your existence, your food, your water, your lungs. A hacking cough becomes the common language of the army. And then, the wind begins to change its tone. The steady, low howl begins to rise in pitch, punctuated by violent, roaring gusts. The sand is no longer just blowing along the ground. It's being lifted high into the air. Visibility drops from miles to a few hundred yards, then to a few dozen. You can barely see the man marching in front of you. The column, once a proud, organized military formation, is reduced to a stumbling, disconnected line of ghostly figures, each man focused only on not losing sight of the person ahead. The guides know it's coming. They shout warnings, their voices barely audible over the rising shriek of the wind. They try to get the army to take shelter, to huddle on the leeward side of a large dune, anything to get out of the direct path of the storm. But the army is too big, too unwieldy. Chaos begins to take hold. Orders are shouted but are instantly snatched away by the wind. Panic begins to spread like a contagion. Here lies a subtle academic dispute. Would a seasoned Persian army, with experience in desert warfare in Mesopotamia and Persia, truly be so unprepared for a sandstorm? Some historians argue that they would have had protocols for this, that they would have known to dismount, to make the camels kneel in a circle, and to shelter behind them, covering their heads. Others contend that the scale and ferocity of a truce at Harran Khamsin is on a completely different level from anything they might have experienced before. They argue that no amount of training could prepare an army of this size for what was about to happen. You are in the middle of this chaos. The sky is now terrifying, roiling ceiling of dark, turbulent brown. The sun is completely gone. It is midday, but the world is plunged into a suffocating, dusky twilight. The wind is a physical force, A solid wall that you have to lean into just to stay upright. Sand, whipped to incredible speeds, feels like thousands of tiny needles lashing at any exposed skin. It's not a storm anymore, it's an explosion. The southern wind has finally, fully awakened, and it is about to unleash its full fury upon the 50 thorough men who dared to trespass in its kingdom. The world is coming to an end in a scream of wind and a torrent of sand. This is the moment that will be immortalized in history, the climax of your doomed journey. This is the event that our main, and almost only, source the Greek historian Herodotus describes with terrifying brevity, writing about a century after the event. Based on stories he heard from the people of Egypt, he gives us the official, legendary account of what happened next. And now, you are living it. The sky is no longer a sky. It's a solid, churning mass of sand and dust, so thick and dark that day has turned into a hellish, amber-hued night. The roar of the wind is absolute, a deafening, all-consuming sound that vibrates deep in your bones. It's impossible to hear a man shouting, even if he is standing right next to you. All communication, all command and control, is gone. The army, as an organized force, ceases to exist. It is now just 50 thorough individuals, each one alone in a roaring, sand-blasted nightmare. You pull your cloak tightly over your head, pressing the fabric against your mouth and nose to filter the choking dust. But it's useless. The fine particles get through, filling your lungs, making you gasp and cough in racking fits that feel like they are tearing you apart from the inside. The air is so thick with sand you feel like you are trying to breathe dirt. Herodotus' account is chillingly simple. A wind arose from the south, strong and deadly, bringing with it vast columns of whirling sand, which entirely covered up the troops and caused them wholly to disappear. You now see what he means by vast columns of whirling sand. The storm is not a uniform blast. It's filled with terrifying, localized vortexes, smaller whirlwinds within the larger tempests that rise up like malevolent spirits. They are minus tornadoes of sand, and they tear through the scattered ranks of the army with ferocious power. You see one rip through a line of soldiers 100 yards away, lifting men and even pack animals off their feet and tossing them aside like dolls. The sand itself becomes the enemy. It's not just blowing, it's accumulating. It piles up and drifts against any obstacle. You see men stumble and fall, and before they can get up, the shifting sand begins to cover them. They struggle, but their movements only seem to make them sink faster. Their comrades, blinded and disoriented, cannot help them. They are swallowed by the storm. This is where we must pause and consider the historical accuracy of Herodotus' dramatic image. Was an entire army of 50 thorough men truly buried alive under mountains of sand in a single, cataclysmic event? This is the central debate of the entire legend. Most modern geologists and archaeologists are skeptical of this literal interpretation. While a massive sandstorm can certainly kill you, and can bury things over time, the idea of it instantly interring an entire army under dunes is unlikely. Sandstorms move sand around. They don't typically dump dozens of feet of it in one spot in a few hours. The landscape is buried and uncovered constantly. So what might have really happened? The academic consensus leans towards a more drawn-out, but no less horrific scenario. The storm would have first and foremost caused complete disorientation. The guides would have been rendered useless. The army, scattered and lost, would have been unable to regroup. The storm would have killed many directly through suffocation or being struck by flying debris. But its most lethal effect would have been what it did to their supplies. The storm would have buried their remaining water and food reserves under drifts of sand, making them impossible to find. So, you are not just being buried alive. You are being stripped of your ability to survive. When the storm finally passes, the survivors and there would have been survivors would find themselves in a radically altered landscape, with no leaders, no direction, no water, and no food. The burial of the army was likely a metaphor, or a dramatic simplification of a death by 1,000-cut suffocation, dehydration, starvation, and despair over the following days. Let's add a strange, sensory detail to this chaos. Static electricity. The friction of billions of sun grains rubbing against each other in the dry air can generate a huge amount of static charge. Your hair would stand on end. You might feel small, painful sparks jumping from your metal spear point or armor to your skin. The air would crackle with an unseen energy, adding another layer of terrifying weirdness to the unfolding apocalypse. You try to find shelter, huddling with a few other soldiers on the leeward side of a struggling camel. The poor beast is kneeling, its head low, its long eyelashes sealed shut against the assault, enduring the storm with a stoicism you can only envy. You press against its warm, leathery side, a tiny island of life in the maelstrom. The sand piles up around you, a rising tide that threatens to engulf you completely. You have no idea how much time has passed. Minutes feel like hours. The world is reduced to the roaring darkness, the sting of sand on your skin, the desperate fight for each breath, and the grim, rhythmic work of shaking the accumulating sand off your body before it entombs you. Herodotus says the army was having its midday meal when the storm hit. It's a small, mundane detail that makes the story even more horrific. One moment, you are sitting down, eating your stale bread, thinking only of the march ahead. The next, the world is ending. There is no glorious battle, no heroic last stand, just the indifferent, overwhelming violence of nature. You are not a soldier in the world's greatest army anymore. You are just a speck of organic matter about to be erased from the map by a southern wind. As violently as it began, the storm eventually starts to wane. The apocalyptic roar of the wind gradually subsides, replaced by a series of shuddering, mournful gusts. The suffocating curtain of sand thins, first to a hazy fog, then to a shimmering veil, and then silence, a silence more profound and absolute than any you have ever known. It presses in on your eardrums, a deafening absence of the chaos that has been your entire world for what felt like an eternity. You push yourself up, coughing out a thick paste of dust and saliva. Your body is a symphony of pain. Your eyes are raw and swollen. Your skin is flayed and raw, and your throat feels like it's been scoured with sand. You look around, and the world has been remade. The landscape is pristine, wiped clean. The dunes have been reshaped into new, soft minus-edged mountains. The ground is a smooth, rippling canvas of golden sand, unmarked by a single footprint. It's eerily beautiful, like the first morning of creation, but it's a terrifying beauty. Everything is gone. You stand up and look for the army, but there is no army. Where there was once a column of 50 sorrow men, there is now only a vast, silent emptiness. The scene is one of utter desolation. Here and there, you see a tattered piece of a cloak sticking out of a noose and drift, or the dark, curved shape of a dead camel's hump, already half-minus buried. You see the glint of a discarded spear point, or the broken wheel of a supply car, its other half swallowed by the sand. The mighty Persian war machine has been dismantled and scattered across miles of desert, its pieces buried under a smooth blanket of sand. You stumble through the eerie silence, calling out for your comrades. Your voice is a weak, croaking thing, swallowed by the immense space. You hear a few other voices calling back, faint and desperate. Small groups of survivors begin to coalesce, emerging like ghosts from the new landscape. You find a dozen men here, 20 there, huddled together, their faces masks of shock and disbelief. No one knows where the officers are. No one knows where the guides are. No one knows which way is west. The sun, now unobscured in a sky washed clean and pale, beats down with its familiar intensity. And with the return of the sun comes the return of a familiar, desperate thought: water. You check your water skin. It's either empty or what little remains is now gritty, undrinkable sludge. You look around frantically for the supply camels, the ones that carried the bulk of the army's water. You see a few of their carcasses, but most are simply gone, buried or wandered off to die in the storm. The precious cargo of water and food that was supposed to keep you alive is now lost forever beneath the sand. This is the scenario that many historians believe is the most plausible. The army wasn't literally buried alive in one go. Instead, a core group was killed by the storm itself, suffocation being the primary cause. The survivors, perhaps numbering in the thousands, were left in this hopeless situation. This brings us to a grim, but important, historical point: the psychology of survival in a lost group. Without leadership, without a clear goal, and without resources, military discipline evaporates. The survivors would have broken into small, desperate bands, each trying to find their own way to safety. But with the landscape altered and all landmarks gone, they would have been walking blind. You and your small group of survivors face a stark, impossible choice. Which way do you go? There are no tracks to follow. The sun is your only guide. But without knowing how far you've come or how long you were in the storm, even that is of limited use. Do you try to backtrack to Kaga, or do you push on, hoping against hope that Siwa is just over the next dome? Factions would form, arguments would break out. The fragile bonds of comradeship, already strained by the storm, would shatter under the pressure of mortal terror. And here's a weird, chilling detail about desert survival you might now have to contemplate: thirst minus crazed madness. Extreme dehydration doesn't just kill you. At first drives you insane. It causes hallucinations, severe confusion, and delirium. Then might start seeing mirages of lakes and cities, running off towards them in a futile, final burst of energy. They might become paranoid and violent, seeing their comrades as rivals for an existent water source. The last days of the Lost Army would not have been a noble tragedy, but a slow, ugly descent into madness and despair. You look at the faces of the men around you. They are no longer proud soldiers of the Persian Empire. They are just lost, dying men. The silence of the desert is broken by the occasional, desperate cry or the low moan of an injured soldier. The pristine, beautiful landscape is a tomb. The sand that covers the bodies of your friends and the supplies you need to live is smooth and impassive. It holds the secret of what happened here, but it will not tell. You know, with a cold, hollow certainty that you are going to die here. There will be no rescue. The king, back in the safety of the Nile Valley, will eventually hear that his army never arrived. He will never know exactly what happened. The army of Cambyses will simply become a ghost story, a legend whispered by the desert winds. You sit down on the warm sand, the sun beating on your head, and you wait for the end, a final, forgotten casualty in a war against nature. Let's pull the camera away from your tragic fate in the sand for a moment. To truly understand the story of the Lost Army, we need to see it not as an isolated incident, but as part of a pattern. The disastrous expedition to Siwa was not the only massive military blunder Cambyses I committed during his short, chaotic reign in Egypt. In fact, it was one of two major failures that happened almost simultaneously. As your doomed army was marching west, the king himself was leading the main body of his forces south, on an equally ambitious and even more catastrophic campaign. Cambyses' southern target was the Kingdom of Kush, a powerful and wealthy civilization centered in what is now modern-day Sudan. The Greeks and Persians often referred to this region as Ethiopia, a term they used for the land south of Egypt. Kush was famous for its gold mines, its exotic trade goods like ivory and ebony, and its formidable warriors. For Cambyses, conquering Kush was the logical next step after securing Egypt. It would mean controlling the entire Nile Valley, from the Mediterranean to the deep south, and securing access to the legendary wealth of Africa. So with the same imperial arrogance that launched the Siwa expedition, Cambyses led his grand army south from Thebes, following the Nile into the harsh, rocky terrain of Nubia. But he made the same fundamental mistake he made with your mission. He fatally underestimated the environment. The land south of Aswan becomes increasingly difficult. The fertile plains of Egypt give way to the unforgiving Nubian desert. The Nile itself becomes harder to navigate, broken by a series of 6 treacherous cataract structures of rocky rapids and waterfalls that make river transport impossible. According to Herodotus, Cambyses set out on this grand venture without adequate preparation. He didn't pack enough food. He seemed to believe that his army could simply live off the land as it marched. This was a colossal miscalculation. Nubia was not the breadbasket that Egypt was. The further south they went, the sparser the settlements became and the less food there was to be found. The army quickly ran out of provisions. The soldiers first ate their pack animals. When those were gone, they began to eat the grass and roots they could find along the riverbank. And when that ran out, Herodotus tells us, they resorted to the ultimate horror of a starving army. They drew lots, and 1 man in every 10 was killed and eaten by his comrades. This act of desperation is the detail that has been seared into the historical memory of this campaign. Whether it's a literal truth or a dramatic exaggeration to emphasize the scale of the failure, it paints a horrifying picture of a proud army reduced to barbarism. This story of the Kushite campaign provides a fascinating point for historical debate. Was Cambyses truly that incompetent, or is this another example of Herodotus, our primary source, relying on stories from the king's enemies to paint him in the worst possible light? Some scholars argue that archaeological evidence suggests the campaign wasn't a total failure. Persian forces did occupy parts of northern Nubia for a time. Perhaps the stories of cannibalism were propaganda, created by resentful Egyptian priests or rival Greek storytellers. The truth may be that it was not a complete catastrophe, but a partial success that came at a horrific, unacceptable cost, which was then spun into a tale of total disaster. It's a classic case of history being written by the opponents of the vanquished. A weird little detail from Herodotus's account of this region involves the Table of the Sun. He relays a story the locals told about a meadow on the outskirts of the Kushite capital where, every night, the city's magistrates would place a huge quantity of boiled meats. During the day, anyone who was hungry could come and eat their fill. It was said that the earth itself produced this food. This fantastical tale is likely a misunderstanding of a state-sponsored welfare system or a religious ritual, but it adds to the mystique of this distant, semi-mythological land that Cambyses was trying to conquer. It was a land of wonders and strange customs, and for the Persians, a land of unexpected defeat. Ultimately, Cambyses was forced to turn back. He had to abandon his goal of conquering Kush and lead the starving remnants of his grand army back to Egypt. He had lost thousands of men, not to a superior enemy force, but to his own poor planning and hubris. He had been defeated by geography, by the unforgiving nature of the Nubian desert. So, picture the scene. Cambyses returns to Memphis, humiliated and enraged, having lost a huge portion of his main army to starvation in the south. It is at this moment that he would have been expecting news of his other army, the one he sent west to deal with the priests at Siwa. He waits and waits, but no news comes. The 50 Dara men he sent into the western desert have simply vanished off the face of the earth. In the space of a few weeks, the mighty King of Kings, the conqueror of Egypt, has lost 2 entire armies, not in glorious battle, but to sand and starvation. The twin disasters would have been a staggering blow to Persian military prestige and to the king's own psyche. It's this context of total, multi-front failure that makes the legend of the lost army so compelling. It was just a random accident. It was the punctuation mark on a chapter of epic imperial overreach. Alright, let's step out of the swirling sands and the chaos of Cambyses' failed campaigns and into the quieter, but no less contentious, world of historical analysis. For everything we've experienced so far, the arrogant king, the march into the desert, the cataclysmic sandstorm, we have been relying almost entirely on the words of one man. It's time to put our star witness on the stand. His name is Herodotus of Helicrances, a Greek historian who lived and wrote in the 5th century BCE, about 75 years after Cambyses' reign. Without him, the story of the lost army simply wouldn't exist. Herodotus is known, for good reason, as the father of history. Before him, stories of the past were mostly myths, epic poems, or dry chronicles of kings. Herodotus was one of the first to attempt a systematic, investigative approach to recording past events. His masterpiece, The Histories, is a sprawling, ambitious work that attempts to explain the causes and events of the Greco-Persian wars. He traveled widely, from Egypt to Persia to the Black Sea, and he talked to everyone: priests, soldiers, merchants, local officials. He was insatiably curious, a brilliant storyteller, and he had an eye for the dramatic. But here's the problem, he is also sometimes called the father of lies. This is the central, enduring debate that colors everything we know about Cambyses' army. How much of what Herodotus tells us is fact, and how much is entertaining, but ultimately unreliable. Here's he himself often prefaces his more outlandish tales with phrases like, "This is what the Egyptians say," or "For my part, I am bound to report what is said, but I am not bound to believe it all alike." It's an ancient historian's version of allegedly. So when we read his account of the lost army, we have to view it through several critical lenses. First, Herodotus was a Greek. The Greeks and the Persians were existential rivals. The history is, at its core, a story about the heroic Greek struggle for freedom against the mighty, despotic Persian Empire. So he had a built-minus in cultural bias. Any story that made the Persians, and especially their kings, look foolish, cruel, or incompetent was a story he was probably very happy to include. The tale of Cambyses losing to armies to his own arrogance and impunity fits this narrative perfectly. It's a morality tale about the dangers of hubris, a theme the Greeks absolutely love. Second, consider his sources. For the story of the lost army, Herodotus wasn't an eyewitness. He was reporting what he was told a century after the fact. His sources in Egypt were likely priests and local nobles, the very people who had been conquered by Cambyses and would have had every reason to despise him. The stories of him stabbing the Apis bull and flying into sacrilegious rages almost certainly came from this stratum of Egyptian society. They were likely a form of cultural resistance, a way of assassinating the character of a dead conqueror. The story of his army being swallowed by the sands as divine punishment for his planned attack on the oracle of Ammon is the ultimate "I told you so." Third, Herodotus had a magnificent sense of drama. He knew a good story when he heard one. The image of 50 Dairo men being buried alive by a vast column of whirling sand is cinematic, unforgettable, and powerful. It's a much better story than the more likely, but less spectacular, reality of an army getting lost, running out of water, and slowly dying of thirst over several days. Herodotus was writing for an audience. He was competing with epic poets and playwrights. He needed to be engaging. So did he take a kernel of truth, a Persian expedition, to see where that failed and embellish it for maximum dramatic effect? Almost certainly. Let's look at a weird little example of Herodotus' love for a good, if questionable, story. He also tells a tale about giant, gold miners digging ants in India. He describes these ants as being bigger than a fox but smaller than a doll, who would burrow into the ground and throw up piles of gold miners' rich sand, which the locals would then have to steal while being chased by the ferocious creatures. For centuries, this was dismissed as pure fantasy. But some modern scholars have proposed a fascinating theory. What if he was describing giant marmots that lived in the Himalayas, whose burrowing activities brought gold miners bearing soil to the surface? The Persian word for marmot is very similar to their word for ant. It's a classic Herodotus moment, a story that sounds completely insane, but might just contain a distorted grain of truth. This is the lens through which we must view the lost army. It's almost certain that something happened. A Persian force was likely sent towards Siwa, and it likely met with disaster. The basic facts are probably true, but the details, the exact number of 50, the zero, the dramatic, instantaneous burial are all classic Herodote and fair. He gives us the blockbuster movie version of events. Our job, as modern readers trying to get to sleep, is to appreciate the incredible story he tells, while acknowledging that the historical reality was probably something messier, slower, and sadder. He gave us the legend, but the legend itself might be obscuring a more complex, and perhaps even more tragic, truth. So, we have the story from Herodotus, a dramatic tale of hubris and divine retribution. For centuries, this was the only version of events. An entire Persian army marched into the desert and was swallowed by the sand. Case closed. But what if the story isn't just an exaggeration? What if it's a complete fabrication? This is the most radical, and in some ways most intriguing, theory about the lost army of Cambyses is that the army was never lost because it was never sent. This counter-minus theory which has gained traction among a vocal minority of modern historians, puts the entire legend on trial. It argues that the story of the Siwa expedition is a masterful piece of anti-Minus Persian propaganda, invented by Cambyses' enemies to posthumously destroy his reputation. It's a bold claim, and it rests on one simple but powerful piece of evidence, the complete and total lack of any other evidence. Think about it. Our entire, detailed narrative comes from one source, Herodotus, a Greek writing 75 years later, with a clear bias against the Persians. There are no Persian records of this expedition. No, that's not entirely surprising. Many Persian records have been lost to time, but more damningly, there are no contemporary Egyptian records either. You would think that an army of 50, Kajaro men or even 10, Zara marching through Thebes and Karga would have left some trace in the administrative papier of the time. Records of grain requisitions, payments to guides, official decrees, but there is nothing, just silence. This is where the debate among historians gets really heated. Is the absence of evidence truly evidence of absence? One camp says yes. An expedition of this magnitude would have left a paper trail, and its spectacular failure would have been noted by someone, somewhere. The fact that it only appears in Herodotus' dramatic account makes it highly suspect. They argue that the story was likely concocted by Egyptian priests, furious at Cambyses for curtailing their power and wealth, a known historical fact, and then fed to the ever-mindless, curious Herodotus, who was more than happy to report a tale that made a Persian king look like a foolish tyrant punished by the gods. The other camp argues that this is an oversimplification. They contend that the lack of records can be explained. Records from this period are spotty at best. The Persians may have been keen to erase the memory of such a humiliating failure from their own chronicles, and the Egyptians might not have wanted to record the movements of a hated occupying army. This camp believes that while Herodotus certainly spiced up the story, the core event, a failed expedition, did happen. The debate is a perfect example of how historians have to grapple with ambiguity and build arguments on what is not there, as much as what is. So if the expedition was a fabrication, what really happened? The revisionist theory suggests a different narrative. Cambyses conquered Egypt. He was a competent, if harsh, administrator. He took steps to centralize power and reduce the influence of the powerful Egyptian temple estates, which made him deeply unpopular with the priestly class. He also waged a difficult and costly, but not entirely disastrous, campaign in Nubia. Then, he died. After his death, his enemies, primarily the Egyptian priests and his political rivals back in Persia, launched a character assassination campaign of epic proportions. In this version of the story, they took his known actions and twisted them. His pragmatic attempt to reduce the temple's wealth became the story of him stabbing the sacred Apis bull in a fit of mad rage. His difficult Nubian campaign was transformed into a tale of catastrophic failure and cannibalism. And to top it all off, they invented the story of the Siwa expedition, a perfect fable of a sacrilegious king sending an army to its doom in an attempt to defy a god. It's the ultimate fake news story of the ancient world. A small, weird detail that lends a sliver of credence to this theory is the nature of oracles themselves. An oracle's power lay in its reputation. The priests of Siwa would have had a vested interest in promoting a story about the dire fate that befell a king who dared to challenge them. It was a powerful advertisement for their divine connection and a stark warning to any other rulers who might get similar ideas. You see, what happens when you mess with the oracle of Ammon, the story of the lost army, whether true or not, was good for business. So where does this leave you? The soldier we left to die in the desert. In this version of events, you never existed. Your grueling march, the terror of the storm, your tragic end, it was all a fiction. A ghost story created to smear a dead king's name. You are not a casualty of the desert. You are a casualty of propaganda. This theory is unsettling because it robs the legend of its romance and tragedy. But it's also a powerful reminder of how history is written. The past is not a fixed, stable thing. It is a collection of stories, told by people with agendas, and sometimes, the most enduring stories are the ones that are crafted, not recorded. The story of the lost army of Cambyses might be one of history's greatest examples of this. It's a tale so good, so perfectly dramatic, that it has survived for 500 years, whether it happened or not. Whether the army was real or a phantom of propaganda. One thing is certain, the story itself took on a life of its own. It detached from the dry annals of history and became a legend. A ghost story whispered in caravanserais and marketplaces for centuries. The tale of an entire army, laden with the treasures of an empire, swallowed by the sand, proved to be an irresistible law. The focus shifted from the historical tragedy to a new, tantalizing possibility: buried treasure. As the centuries rolled by, the legend grew and evolved. The 50 Zaro soldiers were no longer just soldiers. They were elite warriors, perhaps even the king's own immortals. They weren't just carrying standard miners issue weapons and rations. Their paid chests were overflowing with Persian gold, Dari CS and silver Siglo I. The supply train wasn't just carrying water and grain. It was laden with plundered artifacts from the temples of Thebes. The legend transformed a military disaster into one of the greatest lost treasures in history. You can picture the scene, repeating itself over and over through the ages. A weathered caravaner, his face lined by the sun and wind, sits by a fire in a desert oasis. He gestures out into the darkness of the grates and sees and tells a wide-minded young traveler the story he heard from his father, who heard it from his father before him. He speaks of a wave of sand that buried the army of the angry foreign king. He whispers that on a clear, quiet night, if the wind is just right, you can still hear the ghostly clang of their armor and the cries of the dying men. And, he adds, leaning in conspiratorially, if you are brave enough, and if the gods smile upon you, you might just stumble upon the resting place of their golden eagles and their chests of coins, uncovered for a moment by the shifting sands before the desert claims them again. This is how a historical event, real or imagined, becomes folklore. It taps into a universal human desire for mystery and riches. The story of Cambyses' army became the Sahar unequivalent of the lost city of El Dorado or the pirate treasure of Captain Kidd. It was a perfect story, combining the thrill of the unknown with the promise of immense wealth. And people didn't just tell the story, they went looking. For centuries, local Bedouin tribes, adventurers, and opportunistic travelers would make forays into the western desert, not with the scientific precision of archaeologists, but with the hopeful ambition of treasure hunters. They were guided by rumor, by misinterpreted maps, and by dreams. Here's a small, interesting detail about desert geography that played into these hopes: the phenomenon of deflation. In the desert, the wind is constantly carrying away lighter particles like sand and silt, leaving behind heavier objects like rocks, pottery, and, presumably, metal artifacts. This means that an area that was once buried can be deflated over time, with ancient objects slowly being exposed on the surface. So the idea of stumbling across a 500-year-old Persian helmet or sword glinting in the sun isn't entirely fantasy. It's this possibility that kept the legend alive and fueled the dreams of treasure seekers. The academic world, for the most part, dismissed these treasure hunts as romantic nonsense. The mainstream historical view, for a long time, was that if the expedition happened at all, the soldiers would have been carrying standard military equipment, not vast treasures, and whatever they were carrying would have been scattered over hundreds of square miles, scoured by sand for millennia, and be almost impossible to find. The debate was largely confined to whether Herodotus was telling the truth, not where the gold was buried. But the legend persisted, independent of scholarly opinion. It became part of the cultural fabric of the western desert. The lost army was a bogeyman, a cautionary tale. Parents in the oases might tell their children not to wander too far into the desert, as they meet the ghosts of the Persian soldiers. It was a story that explained the desert's dangers, its eerie sounds, and its vast emptiness. The story also reflects a recurring theme in Egyptian history, the land itself rising up to defend itself against foreign invaders. The Nile floods its banks, protecting Egypt and the desert. Egypt saw the great natural barrier, summons a storm to swallow a sacrilegious army. It's a powerful nationalist narrative, and it's no wonder it had such staying power among the local population. So, for over 2,000 years, the lost army of Cambyses existed in this strange limbo. For historians, it was a frustratingly unverifiable footnote in Herodotus. For everyone else, it was a grand and romantic adventure story, a promise of mystery and gold shimmering just over the next sand dune. It was a ghost story written in sand, waiting for the modern world to come looking for it with new tools and a new set of motivations. The age of the treasure hunter was about to give way to the age of the explorer and the archaeologist, and that would bring a whole new chapter to the story. The legend of the lost army might have remained a piece of dusty folklore, a tale for desert campfires, if not for a world-changing event at the turn of the 19th century. In 1798, a young and ambitious French general named Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Egypt. This was not just a military conquest, it was a scientific one. Napoleon brought with him an army of soldiers, but also an army of scholars, 167 of them. To be precise, they were botanists, geologists, artists, engineers, and historians, and their mission was to study, document, and catalogue every aspect of this ancient land. This expedition, the Commission des Sciences et des Arts, sparked an explosion of European interest in ancient Egypt, a phenomenon that would become known as Egyptomania. The scholar's monumental work, The Description d'Egypte, a multi-volume publication filled with stunningly detailed drawings of temples, artifacts, and daily life, opened up a world that had been largely mysterious to Europeans. Suddenly, everyone was obsessed with pharaohs, hieroglyphs, and pyramids. Ancient Egypt was no longer just a place in the Bible. It was a real, tangible civilization that could be studied, explored, and, unfortunately, plundered. And with this new wave of scholarly interest came a renewed focus on the classical texts about Egypt, most notably the work of our old friend Herodotus. European explorers and proto-Minos archaeologists, now armed with the histories as a guidebook, began to fan out across Egypt, eager to rediscover the places he described. And what story was more alluring, more epic, than that of the lost army of Cambyses? The legend was given a modern reboot. It was pulled from the realm of folklore and placed onto the agenda of serious academic and exploratory inquiry. The search for the lost army became something of a holy grail for a new breed of 19th and early 20th century desert explorers. These were not the treasure hunters of old. They were often wealthy aristocrats, military officers, or academics, men who were driven by a potent cocktail of scientific curiosity, personal ambition, and national pride. Finding the lost army would not just solve a 300-year-old mystery. It would bring immense fame and glory to the discoverer and his home country. One of the first notable searchers was the Italian adventurer Giovanni Bolzoni, a former circus strongman turned antiquities collector who explored Egypt in the early 1800s. He was a larger than life character responsible for finding and moving countless artifacts, including the colossal stone head of Ramesses II to the British Museum. He made inquiries about the lost army, but the desert's vastness defeated him. This is a good spot for a quirky detail about early Egyptology. The decipherment of hieroglyphs by Jean-Francois Champollion in 1822, using the Rosetta Stone that Napoleon's men had found, was the key that unlocked ancient Egypt's written history. However, for a long time before that, scholars had the wildest theories about what the symbols meant. Some believed they were purely symbolic magical spells, others that they were a form of Chinese writing, and one 17th century scholar was convinced they were a secret Christian code. The real, linguistic nature of the script was a profound breakthrough that separated scientific Egyptology from speculative fantasy. The search for the army, however, remained firmly in the realm of speculation. The academic debate continued to rage. Was Herodotus reliable? Where exactly was the oasis the army departed from? Which route did they take? Maps were drawn, theories were proposed, and expeditions were launched, but the desert stubbornly refused to give up its secrets. The scale of the search area was simply too vast. The Great Sea is roughly the size of Ireland. Looking for the remains of a scattered army in that expanse was like looking for a handful of needles in a continent-sized haystack. The story also took on a new, colonial flavor for European explorers. The story of the Persian army's failure was a cautionary tale, but also a challenge. They saw the ancient Persian Empire as a precursor to their own imperial ambitions, to succeed where Cambyses had failed to map, to understand, and to master the desert was a way of proving their own superiority. The desert became a great, blank canvas on to which they could project their desires for knowledge and conquest. So as the 19th century bled into the 20th, the Lost Army was firmly embedded in the Western imagination. It was no longer just an Egyptian ghost story. It was now a great, unsolved mystery of classical history, a challenge to modern science and exploration. The stage was set for more organized, more scientific, and even more obsessed individuals to take up the search. The hunt was about to get serious. The early 20th century was the golden age of desert exploration, a period of romantic adventurers in cocky shorts and pith helmets, driving rickety Ford Model Ts where only camels had gone before. The search for the lost army of Cambyses continued, but it was one man in particular who became inextricably linked with the legend, a character as mysterious and compelling as the story he was chasing Count Laszlo Almasy. If that name sounds familiar, it's probably because you know him as the inspiration for the main character in the novel and Oscar-winning film, The English Patient. But the real Almasy was even more fascinating than his fictional counterpart. He was a Hungarian aristocrat, a pioneering aviator, a desert explorer, a cartographer, a sportsman, and, during World War II, a spy for the Germans. He was a complex, contradictory figure who was more at home in the vast silence of the Libyan desert than in any European drawing room. Almasy was obsessed with the desert's secrets. He spent years exploring the uncharted expanses of the Great Sea, often in collaboration with a group of other eccentric European explorers. They used a combination of old miners-fashioned camel caravans and, crucially, new technology like motor cars and airplanes to penetrate deeper into the desert than anyone had before. Almasy was a master of desert navigation and survival, respected even by the Bedouin tribes who knew the sands best. One of his most famous discoveries was the legendary Zia Azura, the oasis of the little birds, a mythical oasis that had been rumored for centuries but never found. In 1932, using his airplane, he located a series of 3 hidden valleys deep in the Gil Kheber Plateau, a remote mountain of rock rising out of the Sands Sea. This discovery cemented his reputation as one of the greatest desert explorers of his time. But Zia Azura wasn't his only obsession. He was also captivated by the story of Cambyses' lost army. He had read Herodotus, of course, and he believed the story was true. But he brought a new, methodical approach to the search. He wasn't just a treasure hunter. He was a geographer and a historian. He meticulously studied the possible routes, the ancient caravan trails, and the geology of the desert. He believed that previous searchers had been looking in the wrong place. This is where we get a great academic debate that Almasy himself championed. Most previous theories assumed the army had marched west or northwest from the Kaga oasis. Almasy proposed a different, more southerly route. He argued that the army might have been following an ancient, forgotten trade route that led from Dakli oasis southwest towards the Gil Kheber, before turning north towards Siwa. His reasoning was based on his deep knowledge of the terrain and the logic of desert travel. And in 1933, deep in this remote southern region, he made a discovery that he believed was connected to the lost army. He stumbled upon a series of strange earthen mounds and what he identified as Persian miner-style arrowheads. He even found a human skeleton that he believed belonged to one of the lost soldiers. He documented his findings, convinced he was on the right track, that he had found the battlefield where the army had met its end. A weird and wonderful detail from this era of exploration is the discovery of prehistoric rock art in the Gil Kheber. most famously at the Cave of Swimmers, which Almasy helped to popularize. These stunning paintings, depicting people swimming in a time when the Sahara was a lush savanna, completely changed our understanding of the region's history. It was a reminder that the desert Almasy and Cambyses' army experienced was a relatively recent phenomenon, and that the land itself held secrets far older than any Persian king. So, did Almasy find the lost army? The historical community remains deeply skeptical. The evidence he found was scant and has never been professionally verified. The mounds could have been natural formations. The skeleton could have been from any period. The arrowheads were not definitively Persian. Many historians believe he was a brilliant explorer who got carried away by his romantic obsession, seeing clues where there were none. He was so in love with the legend that he wanted to find it. And so he did, regardless of whether he was right or wrong. Laszlo Almasy's search represents a crucial turning point. He combined old miners' school adventurism with a more scientific methodology. He used modern technology, the car and the plane, to open up the desert in a new way. He popularized the story for a 20th century audience and placed the search for the lost army firmly in the rugged, unexplored terrain of the Gil Kebir. He may not have found the army, but he deepened the mystery and left a compelling new set of coordinates for future generations of searchers to follow. The lone wolf explorer, driven by instinct and obsession, was about to give way to a new era of high-state, team-based archaeology. The era of the solitary, romantic explorer like Laszlo Almasy eventually faded, replaced by the more structured, scientific, and often less glamorous world of modern archaeology. The end of World War II and the subsequent political shifts in North Africa changed the nature of desert exploration. The wild, lawless frontier that Almasy roamed became a region of nation-states with borders, permits, and antiquities laws. The treasure hunter was replaced by the PhD student. The pith helmet was replaced by the GPS unit. The search for Cambyses' army didn't stop. It just changed its methods. The new generation of archaeologists brought a different toolkit and a different mindset. The goal was no longer just to find the army, but to understand the context. They were interested in trade routes, climate change, settlement patterns, and the complex relationship between the Persian Empire and the people of the oases. The lost army became one puzzle piece in a much larger historical picture. This shift brought a healthy dose of skepticism. Many mid- to late 20th century archaeologists and historians simply dismissed the story as a hero-dote fantasy, not worthy of serious fieldwork. The failure of Almasy and others to produce any concrete evidence, combined with a lack of corroborating texts, led many to file the story under myth. The academic consensus swung firmly towards the theory that the expedition had never happened. It was seen as a waste of time and resources to go looking for a ghost army in a sea of sand. But the legend was too compelling to die completely, and as technology advanced, so did the possibility of tackling the immense challenge of a desert search. The key change was the ability to see the desert from a new perspective from space. This is a crucial development. The advent of satellite imagery in the 1970s and 80s revolutionized desert archaeology. For the first time, researchers could sit in a lab in Europe or America and systematically scan vast tracts of the Sahara, looking for telltale signs of ancient human activity. They could trace the faint, almost invisible lines of ancient caravan routes, barely discernible on the ground but visible from orbit. They could identify potential archaeological sites, dark smudges of soil that might indicate the remains of a settlement or even a temporary campsite. Satellite imagery couldn't find a Persian helmet, but it could narrow down the search area from the size of a country to the size of a county. It allowed for a more targeted, strategic approach to fieldwork. This leads to a weirdly cool bit of modern archaeological science: magnetity. Once a promising area is identified from satellite photos, teams on the ground can use devices called magnetometers. These tools measure tiny variations in the Earth's magnetic field. A buried brick wall, a fire pit, or a large cluster of metallic objects like, say, a pile of discarded weapons will create a small magnetic anomaly that the device can detect. It allows archaeologists to see what's under the sand without digging. It's a slow, painstaking process of walking back and forth across a grid, like mowing the lawn, but it can reveal hidden structures and focus excavation efforts. This new technological approach reignited the debate. While many remained skeptical, some researchers began to argue that a systematic, high-tech search had never really been attempted. They believed that if a large body of men had perished in a specific area, they would have left a detectable trace, a concentration of metal from weapons and armor, a trail of pottery, perhaps even the altered soil chemistry from 50 decaying bodies. The core historical question also remained a point of lively debate. Was Herodotus a liar or just a dramatist? A 20th-century historian named Tom Brown famously argued that a sandstorm could indeed be that destructive. He cited a modern incident from 1933 where a sandstorm buried a train in the American desert, proving that such events, while rare, were possible. Others countered that the specific geology of the Egyptians and sea made such a large scale burial event unlikely. The argument went back and forth in academic journals, a scholarly version of the wind itself, constantly shifting the sands of opinion. So by the turn of the 21st century, the stage was set for a major showdown. On one side, the overwhelming weight of academic skepticism, which held that the army was a myth. On the other, a small but persistent group of believers, armed with new technologies and the conviction that the desert still held its secrets. The story had moved from legend to adventure to science. It was no longer about a single explorer's gut feeling. It was about data, grids, and remote sensing. All that was needed was a team with enough funding, enough confidence, and a sensational claim to bring the lost army roaring back into the headlines. And in 2009, that's exactly what happened. After decades of scholarly skepticism and quiet, methodical fieldwork, the story of the lost army exploded back into the public consciousness in November 2009. The news broke with a sensational headline that flashed across the globe: lost Persian army found in Egyptian desert. It was the archaeological equivalent of finding a needle in a haystack, a discovery that promised to solve a 500-year-old mystery once and for all. The claim came from a pair of Italian twin brothers, Angelo and Alfredo Castiglione. They were not your typical mainstream academics. They were filmmakers, explorers, and self-taught archaeologists with a long and colorful history of expeditions across Africa. For years, they had been quietly working on the Cambyses theory, convinced that everyone before them had been looking in the wrong place. They dismissed the southern route proposed by Almasy and returned to the most direct and most dangerous possibility: a straight shot west from Kaga or Dakla towards Siwa. Their theory, which they had been developing for over a decade, was that the army had not been caught in the open desert of the Great Sea. Instead, they argued, the army must have been seeking shelter from the storm and was ambushed and annihilated near a rocky outcrop, a place called Jebel Masaude, not far from the Siwa oasis itself. This was a radical departure from the traditional narrative. It replaced the idea of a natural disaster with a human won a battle. Their proof, as presented to the world's media, was a collection of artifacts found over several years of searching in a very specific, concentrated area. The centerpiece of their discovery was what they described as a natural shelter, a large rock formation where they believed the remnants of the Persian army had tried to hide from the sandstorm. And near this rock, they had found a trove of compelling evidence. They presented bronze weapons, including a dagger and several arrowheads, that they claimed were of a cayman-dyed Persian design. They found a silver bracelet, similar to ones worn by Persian nobility. They unearthed what they identified as a horse bit, part of a Persian cavalryman's equipment. Most dramatically, they found hundreds of human bones scattered across the area, which they claimed were the remains of their lost soldiers. And, in a shallow pit, they found a mass grave containing what they said were the skeletons of a Persian soldier and his horse, buried together. This last detail was particularly evocative, a poignant image of a warrior laid to rest with his mount. A fascinating tidbit they highlighted was the use of a tool from a completely different field: geology. They had studied geological surveys of the area, which indicated that the landscape had not been a deep sea in the 6th century BCE. This supported their theory that the army could have marched through the area and that the story of them being buried under massive dunes was a later age. The Castiglione brothers wove all this evidence into a coherent and thrilling narrative. The Persian army, battered by the Sandstorm, but not yet destroyed, took refuge at this rock formation, but they had been tracked by local tribes, perhaps from Siwa itself, the warriors of the oasis. Seeing the mighty Persian army in a weakened and vulnerable state, seized their opportunity. They launched a surprise attack, slaughtering the exhausted survivors and burying them in shallow grave. The Sandstorm, in this version, was not the direct killer, but the accomplice that delivered the crippled army into the hands of its enemies. It was a brilliant theory. It explained why the army vanished without a trace. They were killed and buried far from any major route. It explained Herodotus's story, suggesting it was a garbled account that conflated the storm with the ambush, and it had physical evidence to back it up. The world was captivated. For a few weeks, it seemed the mystery was finally solved. News channels ran documentaries, magazines published glossy photos of the artifacts, and the Castiglione brothers became overnight archaeological superstars. It felt like the perfect ending to a 500-year-old story, the combination of dogged exploration, a clever theory, and tangible, physical proof seemed to have cracked the case. The ghost army had finally been given a grave, but in the world of archaeology, a field built on peer review and rigorous verification. A sensational headline is one thing. Scientific acceptance is another thing entirely, and as the initial excitement faded, the skeptics began to sharpen their pencils and clear their throats. The dust had barely settled on the Castiglione brothers' blockbuster announcement when the pushback began. It started as a murmur in online forums and academic blogs, then grew into a chorus of doubt from the mainstream archaeological and historical community. The sensational discovery, which had looked so convincing in the headlines, began to unravel under the harsh light of scientific scrutiny. The first and most significant red flag for many experts was the way the discovery was announced. Major archaeological finds are typically revealed first in peer-reviewed academic journals. This is the cornerstone of the scientific method. It allows other experts in the field to examine the evidence, question the methodology, and verify the conclusions before the story goes public. The Castigliones, however, bypassed this process entirely. They went straight to the media, presenting their findings in a documentary film and a book. This immediately made many academics suspicious. It looked more like a publicity stunt than a serious scientific announcement. Then, the experts started to pick apart the evidence itself. The artifacts, which looked so compelling at first glance, were problematic. The bronze dagger and arrowheads. Critics pointed out that similar designs were used throughout the ancient Near East and Egypt for centuries. There was nothing uniquely or definitively Persian about them. They could have belonged to local tribes, traders, or even Roman Minas-era soldiers. The human remains were even more troubling. The Castigliones had presented photos of some bleached bones scattered on the desert surface, but archaeologists know that bones left exposed in the desert for 500 years would likely have disintegrated or been buried long ago. Furthermore, the brothers had not conducted any modern forensic analysis. There was no carbon dating to confirm the age of the bones, no DNA analysis to determine their ethnic origin. Without this basic scientific data, the bones were just bones. They could have been from a Bedouin encampment from a few hundred years ago, or a forgotten Roman Minas-era cemetery. This brings us to a crucial, if slightly morbid, aspect of desert archaeology known as taphonomy, the study of how organisms decay and become fossilized or preserved. The preservation of organic remains like bone in the desert is incredibly complex. In the hyper-minus arid core, things can be naturally mummified and last for millennia, but in areas with more seasonal moisture or abrasive, in blown sand, they can be destroyed very quickly. The academic debate here was fierce. Would the bones of Cambyses' army have survived at all? And if so, in what condition? The Castiglione's surface finds didn't seem to fit the expected preservation patterns. The mass grave with the soldier and his horse also came under fire. The photos were unconvincing to many experts, and again, without proper excavation records and dating, it was impossible to verify the claim. The whole story began to look less like a confirmed discovery and more like a collection of disparate, undated finds that had been woven together into a compelling, but ultimately unsubstantiated narrative. Perhaps the most damning criticism came from the Egyptian authorities themselves. The Supreme Council of Antiquities, then led by the famous and formidable Drive, Shaios, publicly refuted the Castiglione's claims. It was stated that the brothers had not been granted permission for an official archaeological dig and that their discoveries were unsubstantiated. He dismissed the story as unfounded, effectively slamming the door on any official recognition of their find. The consensus that emerged in the academic world was that the Castiglione brothers were, at best, well-intentioned amateurs who had let their enthusiasm get the better of them. They had found some interesting, but inconclusive, artifacts and had leapt to a grand conclusion that the evidence simply couldn't support. The lost army of Cambyses, it seemed, was still lost. The 2009 episode serves as a perfect case study in the tension between the public's desire for amazing discoveries and the slow, cautious, and often frustratingly inconclusive nature of real science. The story of the lost army is so powerful that we want it to be found. But archaeology isn't a treasure hunt. It's a meticulous, evidence-based discipline. The skeptics had pushed back, and the mystery of Cambyses' army retreated back into the desert, slipping from the grasp of modern science once again. The wake of the 2009 discovery and its subsequent debunking left the search for the lost army in a strange place. The public excitement had faded, and the academic world felt its skepticism had been vindicated. Yet, the story's allure remained, and for a dedicated few, the failure of the Castiglione claim wasn't an endpoint, but a lesson. It highlighted the need for even more rigorous, more technologically advanced methods if the mystery was ever to be solved. The game had shifted from finding artifacts to analyzing landscapes. This is where the truly cutting-edge technology comes into play. A modern-day battle of high-tech tools against one of the Earth's most ancient and formidable environments. The challenge remains the same: the sheer, mind-boggling scale of the search area. How do you find a needle in a haystack? You build a better magnet. The primary tool is still satellite imagery, but it has become exponentially more powerful than it was in the late 20th century. Today, archaeologists have access to high-resolution, multi-spectral satellite data. This isn't just a picture, it's a complex data set. Satellites can capture light in wavelengths invisible to the human eye, like infrared. This can reveal subtle variations in soil composition, moisture levels, and even buried architecture that would be completely hidden in a normal photograph. A researcher in a lab can now look for the faint, ghostly outline of a massive, 2,500-year-old encampment, a place where the soil was compacted and chemically altered by the presence of thousands of men and animals. Once a promising area is flagged by the eye in the sky, the ground toolkit is deployed, and this is where it gets really cool. One of the most important tools is ground-minus penetrating radar GPR. Imagine pushing a high-tech lawnmower across the sand. The GPR unit sends pulses of radar energy into the ground. These pulses bounce off any buried objects or changes in soil layers, creating a cross-section image of what lies beneath the surface. It can detect a buried wall, a compacted pit, or even a large metallic object. It's the closest thing archaeologists have to X-ray vision. This technology directly addresses one of the biggest debates about the lost army, the buried bison theory. While most scholars doubt the army was instantly interred under a dune, it's very likely that its remains were covered by centuries of shifting sand. GPR offers a potential way to peer beneath that sandy blanket without having to excavate an area the size of a city. Another fascinating piece of tech being used is drone-based photogrammetry. A small, autonomous drone can fly a precise grid pattern over a potential site, taking thousands of overlapping high-resolution photos. A computer then stitches these photos together to create an incredibly detailed 3D model of the terrain. This model is so precise it can reveal subtle depressions and mounds that might indicate buried features, and it allows researchers to document and analyze the site with a level of detail that was unimaginable just a decade ago. Here's a weird but amazing tidbit from a related field that shows the power of this kind of remote sensing. Archaeologists using LiDAR or similar technology that uses laser pulses instead of radar to scan the dense jungles of Central America have recently discovered thousands of previously unknown Mayan structures, revealing that the ancient Mayan civilization was far larger and more complex than previously thought. The hope is that these same tools can unlock the secrets hidden by the sand, just as they have unlocked the secrets hidden by the jungle. But here's the reality check. Even with all this incredible technology, the desert still holds the upper hand. The search area is vast. The cost of mounting these high-tech expeditions is enormous. The political situation in the remote border regions between Egypt and Libya can be unstable, making fieldwork dangerous and often impossible. And the desert environment is relentlessly hostile to sensitive electronic equipment. The fundamental problem remains the technology is only as good as the theory guiding it. You still have to know where to point your satellite, where to fly your drone, and where to push your GPS card. If the army perished in a single, catastrophic event, a high-tech surge might one day find the concentrated debris field. But if the army was scattered by the storm and the survivors died in small, desperate groups over hundreds of square miles, then even the best technology in the world may never find them. The digital search for a ghost can be just as frustrating as the analog one. The technology has evolved, but the desert's ability to keep a secret has not diminished. So after all that talk of satellites and ground-minus penetrating radar, after all the high-tech wizardry aimed at the sand, you find yourself right back where we started, sitting in the dark, contemplating a ghost story. The technology gives us tantalizing new ways to look, but it hasn't given us an answer. And so, you're left in the same position as every historian for the last 2 millennia, sifting through a handful of possibilities, trying to decide which story of the lost army feels the most true. Today, the academic debate has settled into 4 main camps, 4 competing theories, each with its own evidence, its own logic, and its own passionate advocates. Choosing one over the other says a lot about how you view history, human nature, and the words of a certain Greek storyteller. First, you have Theory A, the Hollywood blockbuster. This is the literal interpretation of Herodotus. 50,000 men marched into the desert. A supernatural sandstorm of divine fury rose up, and the entire army was buried alive in a single, cinematic moment of apocalyptic wrath. It's the most dramatic, the most memorable, and the most famous version of the story. It's a perfect morality tale of hubris punish. The problem, as we've seen, most scientists and geologists find it highly improbable. It's a great story, but it probably isn't great history. It treats the desert like a monster in a myth, with a conscious, benevolent will. Next is Theory B, the slow, ugly death. This is the version most modern historians lean towards if they believe an expedition actually happened. In this scenario, the sandstorm was real and devastating, but it wasn't a supernatural burial machine. It was a catalyst. The storm scattered the army, killed many through suffocation, and, most critically, buried their water and food supplies. The survivors, perhaps numbering in the thousands, were left leaderless, disoriented, and without resources in a radically altered landscape. What followed was not a single event, but a drawn-out, horrific ordeal of dehydration, starvation, and despair over several days. The army wasn't buried, it withered. This theory is less dramatic but far more plausible, and in many ways, more terrifying. It's a story about the brutal, indifferent mathematics of logistics and survival. Then there's Theory C, the ambush. This is the theory championed by the Castiglione brothers and others. It adds a human element to the disaster. The storm wasn't the killer, it was the accomplice. It crippled the Persian army, leaving them weak, exhausted, and vulnerable. And then, Local forces, either C1 warriors or other desert tribes, seized the opportunity. They tracked the struggling survivors, picked them off, and finished what the storm had started. This theory is compelling because it gives agency to the local Egyptians and Libyans. They aren't just passive victims of Persian conquest. They are active defenders of their homeland, who cleverly used the environment as a weapon. It turns a natural disaster into a military victory. Finally, we have Theory D, the big lie. This is the most cynical, and perhaps the most intellectually challenging, of all the theories. It posits that the army was never lost because the army was never sent. The entire story of the Siwa expedition is a brilliant piece of political propaganda, invented after Cambaz's death by his enemies to cement his reputation as a mad, impious tyrant. The evidence for this theory is the lack of evidence for everything else. No Persian records, no contemporary Egyptian accounts, nothing but the single, biased story from Herodotus. This is where historians have to use a very tricky and often controversial tool called the argumentum ex silentio, the argument from silence. It's a fancy Latin phrase for a simple but dangerous idea arguing that something is false because there is no proof that it is true. Usually, it's a logical fallacy, but sometimes, when you expect to find evidence and there is none, the silence itself can be significant. The debate over whether the silence surrounding Cambyses's army is significant is one of the key fault lines in the entire mystery. So you are left with these 4 stories. Was it divine wrath, logistical failure, a clever ambush, or a political lie? What's fascinating is that each theory reveals a different truth about the ancient world. They tell us about the power of myth-minus making, the unforgiving reality of the desert, the potential for local resistance, and the incredible effectiveness of ancient propaganda. The enduring academic debate is no longer just about what happened. It's about how we know what we know, and the limits of that knowledge. The desert has kept its secret, and in doing so, it has left a perfect, empty space for us to fill with our own theories and imagination. The silence of the historical record mirrors the silence of the sand itself, and that is why, 2,500 years later, we are still telling this story. And so, we come to the end of our road, a road that started with the rage of a king in a conquered palace and ends here, in the silent expanse of sand that holds one of history's most enduring secrets. After all the marching, all the theories, all the science and speculation, what are we left with? We are left with a ghost story, a story so powerful it has haunted the imagination of historians, adventurers, and dreamers for 2.5 millennia. Why? Why does this particular story stick with us? While so many other ancient tragedies have faded into academic footnotes, it's not just about the scale of the loss. History is filled with lost armies and failed campaigns. There's something more going on here. The story of Cambyses's army touches on some of our most primal fears and deepest fascinations. There's the fear of being lost, not just lost in a forest or a strange city, but truly, existentially lost, swallowed by a landscape so vast and so empty that your own existence feels insignificant, a brief flicker of life in an eternity of silence. The soldiers of the lost army didn't just die, they disappeared, they were erased, they marched off the edge of the map, and the world they left behind never even got a definitive answer as to how or why. That lack of closure is what makes a mystery truly haunting. Then there's the fascination with the clash between human ambition and the power of nature. The Persian Empire was the greatest superpower of its day, a machine of conquest and control that had subjugated nations' unmoved mountains. And yet, it was brought to its knees by something as simple and as elemental as wind and sand. The story is a profound, humbling reminder that no matter how advanced our technology or how grand our ambitions, we are still subject to the indifferent and overwhelming forces of the natural world. It's a classic tale of hubris, of a king who thought he could command the desert, only to have the desert teach him a terrible lesson. The story also endures because it's a perfect historical mystery. It has just enough evidence to be plausible, but not enough to be solvable. We have the one tantalizing account from Herodotus, a single, flickering candle in the dark. It gives us the characters, the plot, and the unforgettable climax. but there are no other sources, no corroborating evidence, no definitive archaeological proof. This creates a perfect vacuum, and our imaginations rush in to fill it. We got to be the detectives. We can sift through the clues, weigh the theories, and come to our own conclusions. Are you a pragmatist who believes in logistical failure? A romantic who believes in the epic story? A cynic who believes it was all a lie? The story becomes a mirror, reflecting our own way of seeing the world. A final, weird little detail to ponder is the name of the desert itself. The Sahara is derived from the Arabic word for desert, but the ancient Egyptians had their own, more evocative name for it, Deshret, the Red Land. It was the antithesis of their home, Kemet, the Black Land, the fertile soil of the Nile Valley. For them, the world was a stark binary, the black of life and the red of death. Cambyses' army marched out of the Black Land and was consumed by the Red Land. This simple, ancient color minus coding captures the essence of the tragedy perfectly. They left the world of the living and entered the world of the dead, never to return. The army of Cambyses has become more than a historical event. It has become a symbol. It's a symbol of the unknown, of the secrets that lie buried beneath our feet, and of the stories that are whispered on the wind. It's a testament to the fact that sometimes the most powerful stories are not the ones with clear answers, but the ones that leave us with a profound and lasting sense of wonder and of mystery. The soldier is so long gone. The king is dust. The empire has fallen. But the story, like the desert itself, remains. It's a ghost story written in sand, and it will likely be told as long as there are people to listen. And now, the story fades. The dust of the desert settles. The echoes of marching feet grow quiet, drifting away into the deep stillness of the night. Imagine that lost scene. Not the storm, not the chaos, but the profound silence that came after. A vast, star-minus dusted sky stretching over an ocean of sand, now smooth and calm, as if nothing had ever disturbed its sleep. The wind is just a whisper now, a soft sigh across the dunes, carrying with it the faintest memory of a legend. Feel the world of the story dissolve around you, leaving only the quiet comfort of your own space. The weight of history lifts, replaced by the gentle weight of your blankets. The concerns of ancient kings and lost soldiers are far away now. They are just characters in a dream you were having, a dream that is now winding down, its edges blurring into softness. Let your own breath be the only sound you follow now, a slow, steady rhythm, like the turning of the earth. Inhale the peace of the quiet night, and exhale the last remnants of the day. There are no more destinations to march towards, no more mysteries to solve. There is only this moment of deep calm, this gentle descent into rest. You are safe, you are comfortable, and you are drifting peacefully into your own notion of dreams, a place of quiet and of profound, well, minus deserved sleep.